This video is going to cover the second half of chapter 25, and you'll have a form you're going to fill out and turn in. It's going to cover fish and invertebrate circulatory systems. The objectives for this section are to contrast the circulatory systems present in water-breathing versus air-breathing fish, describe circulatory systems present in crocodilians, octopuses, and squid, and explain the mechanism of action of open circulatory systems by providing examples of these in various organisms. In the circular plan for gill-breathing fish, blood flows from the hearts to the gills to the bodies and then finally back to the heart. If you're going to contrast that with mammals, it goes from the heart to the lungs, which is where oxygen is picked up, and then back to the heart and then to the body. Right? But here we have oxygenation that occurs in the gills and then directly to the body. So it's a singular loop for their circulatory system. Now let's contrast with other fish types that have an air-breathing organ. So the top one is an ordinary fish that I just talked about. Oxygenation occurs via the gills and that goes directly to systemic tissues and then back to the heart. And in this pathway, the red portion is the oxygenated portion, the blue portion is the deoxygenated portion, and then you see some stripes which are in between, right? In these air-breathing fish, the air-breathing organ, ABO is what that stands for, can be the gut or the mouth, and you kind of see the contrast between the two. Again, adding air takes the blood that's somewhat oxygenated and it makes it more oxygenated. That's why it gets more red. So it's oxygen rich, and then you lose that oxygen obviously when you go to systemic tissues. In lungfish, the venous vasculature is different than most air-breathing organs. The veins from the lungs lead directly into the left side of the atrium of the heart rather than connecting with the systemic vasculature. So if you go back, you see most of the time the lungs are going to oxygenate the blood flow more, then go to the tissues, lose their oxygen, then go to the heart. In lungfish, what's interesting here is it goes to the lungs first, then directly to the heart before it goes to systemic tissues. This image here represents the circulatory plans of major vertebrate groups on a phylogenetic tree. And as you can see, there's a single loop in fish, but as they're showing here, as you progress through evolution, it changes from a single to a double system, according to the people who wrote this book and who believe in this type of evolution. But what's interesting is amphibians show a partial separation of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, and that's what they're trying to show you here. It looks like this is the relationship, evolutionary relationship, they believe that these animals have based on their circulatory plans. This shows the blood flow in the heart ventricles and the systemic and pulmonary arteries of crocodilian reptiles, right? So if you look at the anatomy, they do have two ventricles, but they maintain a connection between the systemic and pulmonary circuits via the foramen of Panizza. So this is basically a connection between both of them, even though there is two ventricles. This allows for selective control of blood flow during diving or thermoregulation. Octopuses and squids have a closed circulatory system, but they actually have 3 hearts. They have 2 brachial hearts and 1 systemic heart. The brachial hearts are going to pump blood to the gills, and then the systemic heart pumps oxygenated blood to the body, which makes this a really useful body plan to support active predation and high metabolism, because you're getting major pumping throughout all the different parts of the body. Okay, here we're comparing open and closed circulatory systems in invertebrates, right? So in insects, blood bathes the organ directly in an open circulatory system. And I don't know why we're calling it blood, because really it's called hemolymph. It's not the same characteristics as blood. In a closed circulatory system that's also present in invertebrates, this one's an example of what happens in earthworms. These are more efficient at transporting circulatory fluids to tissues and cells because it's all a loop, right? So the pressure that you're exerting from the heart is going to be felt throughout the entire loop. Again, we're comparing open and closed circulatory systems in invertebrates, right? The open circulatory system is common to mollusks and arthropods. Open circulatory systems help pump blood into a hemocoel, with the blood diffusing back to the circulatory system between cells. Again, we call it blood, but really I would say the more correct term is hemolymph. Vertebrates and some invertebrates have a closed circulatory system. Like I said, the earthworm does. In closed circulatory systems, blood is pumped by a heart through vessels and does not normally fill body cavities. So that's what you're going to see here, the differences between open and closed circulatory systems in these different organisms. Spiders have an open circulatory system. Blood, called hemolymph again, flows through sinuses and lacuna rather than blood vessels. And oxygen in these organisms is transmitted via respiratory pigment that we learned about earlier called hemocyanin. So what they did here was they injected a dye and then watched how it moves through the different regions. So it kind of looks like, if you look at the sinus, it kind of looks like a blood vessel, but then it kind of leaks into this open area a little bit later. And that's happening through the lacuna. So lacuna just basically means holes. In the spiders or arachnids, lacuna are just all these little holes where blood flows through, and blood flows where the most blood is needed, where muscles are moving, right? So it's the idea is there's this whole like lacunar system with a bunch of different holes. And the blue marks here are going to represent well-perfused channels. And the O2 dependent muscle is going to receive the most blood flow, because those lacuna basically allow for blood to flow into regions where it's most needed. This here represents the heart of a decapod crustacean. So in this heart, you basically have it suspended in this central sinus area, and it has these holes called ostium. So oxygenated blood are sucked into the heart through the ostia during diastole. So diastole is the point at which the heart is relaxed, and then they're going to be propelled into the arteries. So you don't actually have veins. You do have arteries in the hearts of crustaceans. Looking a little closer, this is the circulatory plan you would see through the body of a lobster or crayfish or other crustaceans like this. So you can see that, yes, there's arteries, but then again, those holes are just going to suck up the blood and then get pushed out via the arteries as well. Okay, now in insects, blood flow occurs through lacuna and sinuses rather than in blood vessels, right? It's a lot like the spiders, where blood flow is most vigorous where it's needed the most. And the main pumping organ is the dorsal heart, which is located on the dorsal side of the body. insects often have accessory pulsatile structures like mini hearts that aid with flow through their legs and wings and antenna, but they usually lack a respiratory pigment. Okay, we're at the end. You need to go in and fill in that table with the circulatory systems of all the different organisms we discussed and turn that in on Populi. I'll see you soon.